Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the narrative, where we explore tales of the dark, the mysterious, and occasionally outrageous and heroic acts that have stayed with us throughout time as we've travelled to this day through humanity. If you like tales of such, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, other than work full time. But I'm bringing one of these to you every week. So if that's your thing, go ahead and like and subscribe so I can keep bringing you this content weekly. Now, more so than anything, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here today to explore a tale with you from coign of vantage, a favourable position. So let's get to it. Welcome to the Tyrant of Clipperton Island. Now picture this, a ring of land, so small it barely exists, jagged terrain, a coral scar of land on the ocean, Pacific, 1,000 kilometers off the Mexico's south coast, hard, jagged terrain. Why would anyone want to live here when it's crawling with crabs that move like living knives? For half the air aroma is laden with such a stench of dreaded pneumonia. It's hard to fathom that anything other than animals with birds and creatures of the day and night could manage to live here for any reasonable amount of time. The ocean hammers from every direction, slowly peeling the island away, and yet the island still stands miraculously. It's like eczema that does the skin from out and within. It slowly peels back to the putrid brown water that surveys this rather interesting place. And yet a handful of coconut palms exist above the jagged terrain, and beneath the waves, sharks. They're infesting the ocean surrounding the island like locusts surround their prey. Not really a particularly inviting place, I might say, as the sharks circle in for their feast to come. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Clipperton Island. Funnily enough, Clipperton Island was decidedly uninhabited at the start of this story, and it now remains uninhabited. I imagine house prices would be rather cheap, but alas, no one wants to live there. Now the story runs deep with rich history of the outrageous kind, because once four nations, known as the Great Nations, badly fought to stand on it, for it had a favourable position, a coign of vantage, one might say. So France, the United States, Mexico and Britain, they all wanted it for two reasons. One, crap. Yes, you heard that right, SH1T. Because they knew that, in their minds, this crap was very profitable on the market, for it had gases that most crap did not have, and a thick white crust that covered it. That be the guano bird droppings, were good for fertilizing content alongside the droppings of seals and bats. You could say that the US, Britain and Mexico had gone bat SH1T for the shizzle. Whoever said bird crap wasn't valuable enough to die for hadn't heard this story. So much so that, ladies and gentlemen, that the fighting of the four countries truly began between 1858 to 1917. All four countries had attempted at one time or another to maintain and conquer the island. Yes, they really wanted it. Now you might ask, what was the other reason? I believe it was bravado, because it's an island, and as long as one has a flag, then they wanted it. Yes. Now the French arrived first in 1858, but they never even set foot on the shore. Why? The reef was too sharp, the sharks too close, the tides too treacherous for the French on that year. So they simply sailed in a slow circle around like motion on the island and shouted their claim to the wind. "It is mine!" And then they left. This is a French ship. Perhaps something that looked like it at the time of 1858. But 34 years later, ladies and gentlemen, the Americans came to claim their stake on the island in 1892. Certain that guano was a fortune of crap waiting to be turned into money, to be bagged. And of course, having learned from the English, they brought a flag. And they did actually get on the island this time, and they planted the flag under the old law that let them claim any guano island they found. Perhaps not a fair law, but there you have it. Those were the times. A flag and might was all one required. So it seems. Now a handful of the Yank miners had tried to make a profit of the manure, and it wasn't quite working out because of poor market conditions and expensive reply tripping back and forth from the US to this coast just off Mexico. And it wasn't quite working. It was burning a hole in their pocket, for the market had turned soft and supply ships were ruinously expensive. In 1897, however, a Mexican party decided to give a stab at the profit and to get on the island and try and dish these Yankees out. They saw the island as theirs, as it was close to their coast, so they thought they had the rightful claim. So the Mexican coaxed 2 of the 3 Americans on that land. They had a small party with some pretense farce, and their backs turned, with the Americans not seeing. They raised their own flag over the US's 40-foot pole. Flag, very important. 40-foot pole, it means I claim the land. That's what they thought. Or so they did it in an American accent. Now, the United States were fed up with the chisel droppings. They thought, yes, we could fight this, but to be honest, there's not many of us, and this is a pretty small team that we have, and they just thought, forget about it. The French, however, who never seemed to even lay foot on the island, still wanted to claim the island as theirs, and was sort of yapping in the background. The English couldn't give a darn. They just simply said, I don't care who owns the island. I am going to mine. And they bought their mining company and began work, insisting ownership was someone else's problem. I imagine the MD said back in that time of the mining company, I don't care who owns the bloody place. Here we are at Guano mining, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Men, let's get to it. And that's exactly what did happen. The Mexicans decided to let them stay because they weren't, laying claim to the island, and that's what the Mexicans really seemed to care about mainly. And so the British cracked on, and the Brits, whilst the Mexicans and French were arguing, built houses. They planted a garden on the decrepit soil. Supposed to be a real beauty of sorts, but the inhospitable soil of Clipperton Island proved a tad ghastly. The Brits, undeterred, however, began mining full scale ahead in 1899. Stiff upper lip and all that, soil doesn't work, whatever, just crack on. But alas, there was too much competition in the markets. The markets had failed them. as they had failed other countries, the great countries back then. And I think it just goes to say that you can paint a turd gold, but it's still a turd. And I believe that the markets were waking up to that. And in 1910, the British had given up too. The Brits left one poor soul, however, there, a caretaker, watching his ship sail away. Can you imagine what he must have felt like? Goodbye then. You are coming back, yes? Don't you worry, son. We'll be back next summer. Laughing with the lads. Poor guy. Anyhow, the great powers continued arguing. And what did that lead to? The Mexicans thought, well, the English have gone, they've left one caretaker, put on their gringo hats and said, right, 13 soldiers, let's get them in. Their leader was a man named Ramon Amord, who became the de facto governor of the Clipperton Island. And he knew that if he was to claim the island in any meaningful manner, whereby which it wouldn't be questioned by other parties, then he would need to get busy with the population. And the men were very happy about that, because they had sort of work that they liked to do. So they brought over their wives, and the servants got busy, cleaning constantly, as you can imagine. The Clipperton Island was filth. So a kind of period of somewhat hope came about, for he could see that a vision was coming, that a population was growing, and that as the bird droppings stank and singed their nostrils, the men cracked on undeterred as they fornicated with their wives, pushing in the motion of creating something good out of this wretched place. Good focus, I say. Nonetheless, Mexico's interest in Ramon's project as a nation began to wane, because a brewing revolution was building in the heart of Mexico, and the supply ships stopped. No message, no explanation. They felt abandoned, just silence. Nonetheless, Mexico's interest in Ramon's project to make the island successful was still in his heart, for he thought they would come round. And now with 26 people living in Clipperton, 13 soldiers, 12 women and children, and a recluse lighthouse keeper named Victoriano Álvarez, who it seemed had nothing to do with the rabble as he saw it, living in the base of a sheer cliff under a lighthouse. We'll come back to him later. The vegetable garden died. The only food left now, what with no supplies coming, was the birds, the eggs, the fish, and a few coconuts, as you can imagine. With supplies and food running low, scurvy was at bay, and slowly came up and affected mainly the men, and it began to eat them alive. If you've ever had scurvy, I can tell you, it's something quite frightful. It's like little mites that slowly eat you from the inside, and it's darn painful. And unless you have the cream for it, you may well die. I got it at university. I'm not quite sure how, but I can tell you, when I put that cream on, I could feel them dying inside me, roaring to get out. Thankfully, they just died. But these men were not so lucky. The men and women began to die. Bodies were buried deep, so the crabs could not dig them up. The men that were alive still had honor in being respectful. Now Ramon refused to leave, for this was his baby, his project, and he felt that he was beginning to grow a population, and he would not let this go easily. He was slightly alarmed, but quite a chilled guy in many ways, seemingly not really the emotional type, maybe the stoic, shall we say, sort, and thought, well, we've got 5 men living left now, and 1 boat. But we still have a boat, and we still have 5 men, and we still have a few women, and enough fuel that remained to go on a jolly. When that jolly would come, he would know, for he was looking wherever possible amongst the coast, looking for a boat that would come to save them. In the meantime, he did the Mexican's stiff upper lip and knew that things would get better. For he loved the sea, and he knew that the ship would come in. And alas, he thought, as he scanned, I will find a ship on the horizon, as he did in a Mexican accent. Now, he did actually see a ship in his mind. He managed to persuade 3 of the 5 soldiers left. And he thought, jolly well, this is our time. We need to get out to that ship. Because he said, oh, ship, ship, ship. And the ship was not coming. He saw the ship that's just going further out into the coast, into the line of the sphere of nothing more for him and his band of not merry men now, and women that were malnourished. And he said to the men as he persuaded them, we need to get going. There is a ship out there. Let's go, men. And they were like, what ship, mate? I'm hungry. I can't even see a ship. You want me to spend all my extra energy on a ship I can't see? He said, I can see. I can see that ship, for I have good eyesight. So he managed to persuade him. I thought, well, he is the captain. I suppose he knows a thing or two. But did he? I think he was now suffering from the delusional mind. For the soldiers and Ramon went out on the only boat with limited fuel, and they went as fast as they could. And then, before they knew it, a sudden, abrupt realization had come into their minds. For the 3 soldiers, it was, I knew there was no ship, mate. I mean, what's he talking about? What's wrong with you, mate? Ramon, I told you there was no darn ship. And Ramon is like, it'll come back, don't worry, it'll come back. It's coming back, gentlemen, just calm down. And it's, oh, not having this. And then all of the 3 soldiers, were Mexican, by the way. It's not an accent that I am particularly up on. But these 3 Mexican soldiers threw him with all his might, with all their might, with all their might together, an action into play. And this action was a rebellion from the 3 soldiers. For they had had enough, enraged by anger, knowing that they probably couldn't get back now, and they were stranded out in a vast array of ocean with nothing but a pot to in. So the 4 men fought, the 3 soldiers against Ramon, and Ramon was not a weakling. Ramon was proud. Ramon was strong. Ramon fought back. And he actually did a darn good job, but it wasn't good enough on that tragic day. All 4 men went overboard, and sadly they were heard no more. Now Ramon's grieving wife looked on. The women looked on. They could see this ruckus happening in real time, and they screamed. It was sad, very melancholy, one might say. But what happened from here? A hurricane. Ramon's wife was grieving, but she had no time to carry on grieving, for this hurricane was tumultuous. A hurricane arrived so severely that they all huddled into the cellar, the only cellar they had, as the storm tore their houses apart. Ladies and gentlemen, just to add to the drama that happened on Clipperton Island at this time, Ramon's wife was heavily pregnant. Alicia Rovira, or should we say Rovira Arnaud, was born, named Angel. nickname and all that. Edward, Eddie, Ed, call me what you want. Sure, we all have an alias of some sort. And both mother and child lived through, thank goodness. And the next morning they climbed back up into the daylight after this hurricane had destroyed their humble abodes. And almost everything ravaged. Very little left standing. But them. Maybe a few tents. Now that was where, you remember that guy I was telling you, the recluse, the lighthouse keeper named Álvarez, I'll call him by his surname, came to appear quite significantly in this story. For here was a guy that lived alone for years, almost forgotten. But now, being an opportunist, knowing that there were no men to oppose him, no one there to protect the women, the children, quickly sprung into action, gathered every weapon that he could find, and threw them into the lagoon, bar one rifle that he kept for himself. He then announced to the women and children that he was now the king of the Clipperton Island. What followed was nearly 2 years of methodical terror. Women essayed when he chose, beaten when he chose. One mother and daughter who refused him were essayed and shot. This was a disgusting, wretched creature in human flesh form. The rest endured. They endured whilst this animal carried on his wicked ways. When they say it's the quiet one that you need to be mindful of, one could say that the best fits very well the description of Álvarez, the monster of Clipperton Island. A crazed sexual sadist, murderer opportunist who was biding his time for that opportune moment to wreak havoc on women and children. However, to say that that is, the quiet ones, a accurate analysis with respect to Álvarez is a sweeping statement. Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes the quiet ones are darn good people. But in this case, no. It's safe to say that it's accurate that Álvarez was evil to the nth degree. Álvarez was true evil, personified in human flesh. There's his teeth, perhaps. Not saying that is his teeth. I imagine his teeth would be a lot worse, given that they didn't have toothbrushes on the island. Certainly see no evidence of that. So, carrying on with this ghastly creature of a human, if you can call him that, he essayed even a 13-year-old Rosalia, then Terza Randon, who hated him openly and waited for her time to take this disgusting animal down. Now one can say that if you are feeling a little and you're in the worst of the worst moments in your life and you feel, why don't I just it all, that despising and living in spite, even if you're running on fumes, can be helpful to keep going. And that's exactly what this young lady did. She stepped into his hut one day, but we'll get to that in a moment. Don't want to fast track too quickly. Now, the governor's widow hated Álvarez, as pretty much everyone did. But this rambunctious spirit of Ramon, of her belated husband, of the timely sad departure of her beloved husband, his spirit, just like with Terza, resided within. And the worse things got, the more of her spirit rose in defiance. Álvarez, knowing this, could openly see it, told her that the moment any hint of a ship would appear, she was going to be out like a light. But in the middle of July 1917, this disgusting, cowardly monster preying on women and children, Álvarez decided, sadly, it was Ramon's wife's turn. But she knew this. The women had a sneaking feeling when he had ordered her to come to his hut the next morning, saying that some errand needed to be done of such sorts along those lines. Not saying why specifically as to the real motive. But Alicia's friend Tirzah Randon looked at Alicia and said these 4 words: "Now is the time!" Maybe in a bit more of a feminine energy, but still, I imagine, quite masculine. For it was time. It was time. On the 18th of July, the 2 women and Alicia's 7-year-old son, who was very much up for the fight himself. He had the dad spirit in him. Yes. Just like, the spirit of his father who took down those 3 scallywag soldiers, one might say. Went along, and they went with him. They all went together as a pack of wolves, one might say. Álvarez was outside his little hut of silly, stupid filth, roasting a bird, almost cheerful, thinking he'd got life down in his decrepit, evil way. And then he saw Tirzah return so soon. He thought something seems a little up. I wasn't expecting Tirzah, but I was expecting Ramona's wife. And he was thinking, but alas, he thought too slowly. So she stepped into his hut. She came out with the hammer. When he couldn't see it, he was sitting on his silly little chair, and boom! Blood, Lego blood, everywhere. Crack! Pow! He couldn't believe what had happened. He felt outrageously in fury. So he got up out of his chair, but then just as this disgusting monster came towards Tirzah, great rage of madness, she cracked him in the head again. Blood, Lego blood. Now, I don't know if they said Lego, by the way. Sorry, it's a Shakespeare thing. Of Othello, I believe. Anyhow, it looked like things were starting to turn good for the ladies and the children. For a brilliant strike had come about to protect these women. Now, I'm not in favor of violence, but when someone does something so heinous to women and children, sometimes one might say, when there's no police about, it could be necessary. I'm not inciting violence in any sense of the word, ladies and gentlemen. I just said could. If you're on an island and you've got some ragtag, disgusting vulture attacking, and we've gone into this, haven't we? So, what came about from that? Well, this cowardly monster became flittering about with rage, skull opening up, blood gushing out, brain matter, had gone everywhere. And the self-declared dictator of the Clipperton town, the coward who hid in the shadows behind men, to only rise to ensure terror when they had passed, because he was a disgusting, vile coward of the worst sort, finally met his demise. And not a minute too soon, I might add. Obviously, it would have been better if it had come earlier, but such is life sometimes. Things don't always go to plan. But alas, we crack on. For the lady standing over the body, and little Ramon, and all of them watching, weren't quite done. No. For the lady that had cracked him over the head was still in a rage, so she took out her knife a big old rusty knife and pounded into him until his corpse looked like a bloody, disgusting mess, and he was barely recognizable. As she stood over his body, she knew, finally, the tragic, sad things that they had gone through because of this vulture were over. And what? The boy had finally and wonderfully heard something. He said, "Mom!" She looked around and said, "Yes, my young Ramon Jr., what is it?" For they felt triumphant, for they had killed the vulture, the tyrant of the Crap Island. And guess what? The ship that they had been looking for had arrived, and it wasn't a delusion, ladies and gentlemen, it was there. And you know what it was called? The USS Yorktown, an American gunboat that was actually hunting for German bases that did not exist. They didn't know that at the time. But finally, even though they weren't aware, they had found a mission worthwhile. So the ladies and the kids screamed with "Help! Help us, please!" I can't do the female voice very well, but you get the idea, right? And yes, they heard them. Can you believe it? It's a miracle. They heard them. But as the boat came towards them, there were waves crashing. Another horrible weather-like format was ravaging the island yet again. And finally, after hours, the women, the child, the children watched the USS Yorktown just sail away. I mean, can you imagine, ladies and gentlemen? They watched their only hope sail away. This was no small feat of tragic melancholy, for some of the ladies still had that rifle because they picked it up from that monster vulture, wannabe tyrant. Well, he was at a point. And they discussed. They sat there quietly and talked as well about just shooting themselves. But alas, in the nick of time, the beautiful ship, because anything's beautiful by that point, right, is coming back to them. And it does actually look, you can see in the picture, quite a beauty of an old traditional ship coming back to them, giving another attempt. Another. Gonna give another go now. Perhaps if they were from the deep south. Gentlemen of the USS Yorktown Brigade. So that's what they did, ladies and gentlemen, and this time they were successful. Hurrah! They felt. Hurrah! Perhaps they said. 3 women and 8 children were taken on aboard. Yes, aboard. And can you imagine how the relief just completely engulfed them? But sadly, the children's bodies were so small from the hunger that the 2-year-old Angel could not walk. But I am glad to say that there's no reports of death, and that even though they were exceptionally malnourished, and it was very sad for the sailors to see, they did get back to good health. Now, Commander Harlan Page Peril knew that they were in peril, pardon the pun, and he later wrote in a letter to his wife the harrowing details of seeing the survivors in such a state, and it clearly affected his emotional regulation. It affected him deeply. And I'm going to put this up here, ladies and gentlemen, so you can read what he said to his wife. He was so touched by what they had gone through that tears began as he wrote the letter, I imagine. Now, the captain and his navigator kept the full truth of what had happened. They did on those final hours of the Clipperton Island. For how long, I hear you say? 17 years. And you know why? Because they were men of honor. And they didn't want these women who, in their minds and in mine, had clearly killed him for self-defense, for them to get into any legal trouble. It's just ghastly silly to think that realistically could happen. But hey-ho, keep it to yourself. Perhaps they just thought, well, they don't have to go through the court hearing. We have to relive all of this and blah, blah, blah. There's no witnesses anyway, I suppose, other than them. I digress. Now, on the mainland, Alicia's father, an elderly gentleman, had been talking with the Mexican authorities day in, day out, saying, "What's the update? Tell me, I need to know." And the Mexican authorities were simply saying, "Sorry, they're dead." But he carried on, he kept looking, he couldn't believe it. And he heard of a boat coming back, and finally he said, "I'm not going to believe it!" So he tracked that boat down. Maybe he got out there on a dinghy, and he did all his best. And he finally found the USS Yorktown. And he stepped onto the deck, found his daughter and his grandchildren. It makes me a little bit emotional. And the sailors wept, for it was a reunion so moving that I think even the Hulk would have been a basket case of blubbing emotional energy. The tears streamed, tears of relief. Thank God, thank goodness. Now, years later, the island was finally awarded to France. I suppose they can perhaps step foot on there now without worrying. I can't do it, I just can't do it. French, we can set foot on there now! Don't worry, no one's there! And say, forgive me about the French accent. So that's what they did. No one, however, since for many a year, has tried living there permanently since. The French soon realized that it was an island of crap and not much more. Now, even without the madman in that lighthouse, more like a creature of the damned, Clipperton remains something of an enigma. To think that humanity was so stupid as to fight, to live so sort of harshly and with such passion on an island of crap. There you go. I hope you've enjoyed. Please like and subscribe so we can deliver you weekly content. Much love.